Hi guys, and welcome to a special edition of the Tiny Tutorials. This is actually a 5-part collection of tutorials that is part of a larger project that I've been working on over on Instagram. I've been going live every day for the month of May and teaching a Scrappy project. And so this is part 1. It takes you through days 1 through 5, where I show you how to cut out and sew up and attach yo-yos and their stems to the front of a larger piece of fabric. And then going forward, we are going to be making those into 1, a tote bag, and then 2, a zippered bag, depending on your skill level as a sewer. But then at the end of each week, I'm editing the videos, putting them together, and putting them up on YouTube so that they're here in case you miss some of the lives. So with that in mind, I ask for your patience as there's a lot of editing that had to go into it. Obviously, it's over the span of 5 different days, so there'll be costume changes, as well as some talking to the people who were participating on the live, so there might be some mentions here and there. But I tried to edit out as much of the chatter as I could and just leave in the instruction so that you can watch it from the comfort of your home. If you have questions about any of the process, please let me know, and if you're able to catch us on any of the lives, I am Daisy Lean Design on Instagram, and they will be happening between 9 and 10 Mountain Daylight Time. That's the time we're in right now, and I live in Colorado, so that's when they are happening. So thanks for joining me today, and I hope that you learned something new. Hello friends, it is day 2 of May Live a Day. I'm Allison of Daisy Lean Design, and it is Saturday, May 2nd, a little early, and it's Saturday, so I don't know who joined, but it'll be here for 24 hours for you to view, and some of the information will be available all together as we work on this project. So we have been talking, or we are going to be talking about doing a Scrappy project using yo-yos. And yesterday I showed you the bag that I made. That was the inspiration for my May Live a Day videos. It is a corduroy, a bright green corduroy with pink pom-pom flowers on it. And since so many of you have been interested in my Scrappy bag making process, I thought that I would share with you a little bit about how I do that and the steps involved in all of that, and encourage you to join me in making something out of scraps and out of yo-yos specifically if you choose to. So this is one of the options, a tote bag, and we'll also talk about some zipper construction with bags, and then if you just want to do some hand stitching, just stitching on a plain piece of fabric. So I had asked you guys yesterday to take a little bit of time to go through your fabric stash and find colors that you might be interested in working with. And I don't know that anybody who was with us yesterday is here yet today, so I might not have any feedback right at this moment, but I am going to show you what I picked out and then how I'm going to go about making circles. So yesterday one of the questions was, what are our dimensions and measurements? So I double checked on all of those things, and the tote bag is going to be 17 inches wide and 18 inches tall. There is a boxed out bottom, which makes it look a little bit shorter and wider, but if you wanted to attempt this project, your measurements for your front, hey guys, is 17 inches wide and 18 inches tall for your background piece, and then these larger circles are 3-inch circles, which means you're cutting 6-inch or 3-inch pom-poms, which means you're cutting 6-inch circles to get started. These guys down here are 4 inches. They're 2-inch pom-poms, so it's a 4-inch circle to get started. And so as you're gathering up your supplies and looking for different things, look for pieces of fabric that are going to yield, first of all, they're going to yield pieces of fabric that can be squares and then of different sizes. So whatever you want your finished pom-pom size to be, double that number, and that's how big your square needs to be. So I hope that makes sense to you as you're going through your fabric stash, and I'll show you the things that I picked out and what I'm going to be working on while we work through this project. For my project this time, I'm going to be using a dark blue denim. This piece happened to be leftover curtains out of my daughter's bedroom when she was very little, and they were light blocking curtains and so that she could take a nap. And now we don't need them anymore, and I've just put them in my fabric stash. And so I cut into these, and I cut 17 inches across and 18 inches tall, and then picked out some fabrics that I wanted to experiment with making the pom-poms and the stems for the front of the bag. So this was a popular line of my cash envelope wallets for many, many years. I partnered with a pretty widely known cash budgeter named Brittany of Pennies into Pearls, and we did like a custom colorway cash envelope set for her and her followers. And so for many, many years this was her custom colored set, but it's been retired. We've moved on to other colors for her. And so I thought it would be fun to use some of the colors involved in that set. And you can see I found strips and pieces that are at least going to be 4 inches to 6 inches wide and tall so that I can get my squares. I did mock up a finished pom-pom just to be sure of my dimensions, and this is a 3-inch wide pom-pom, which means I started with a 6-inch or a 6-inch square piece of fabric. A lot of people ask how I go about picking my colors and how I come up with the scheme that I'm working in. Often it's by just finding a fabric line. You can see the mints and coral and light pinks and golds are repeated in the fabrics, and these were all part of one fabric line that I had found at a shop, Hobby Lobby actually, and so I just kind of built off of that, looking for complementary fabrics to go with it. And other times it's referring to something like a color wheel and seeing what colors work well together. I'm not any sort of color theory expert, but just taking a peek at different color combinations, whether they be in works of art that other people have worked on, a color chart itself, or just finding things in nature, colors that inspire me, that make me interested in looking at a piece, are ones that I like to work with when I'm working in the shop as well. And there's a variation between larger patterns, tiny patterns and prints, things that are going to create interest and depth as you're working on the piece as well. The other thing that I've gathered together is my cutting tools. So I have things like templates, like these are plastic circle templates that I have just because I'm working with this kind of stuff all the time. But if you don't have that kind of thing, raid your kitchen. The kitchen has lots of circles available, whether it be a canister of oats, which happens to measure perfectly at 4 inches, or some larger lids or other canisters or plates. So the kitchen is a great place to raid your home for different size circles. And just because I'm using 6-inch and 4-inch circles and therefore pom-poms doesn't mean that those are the sizes you have to use. They're just the sizes that I've used that look nice on this piece of background fabric. Proportion and fit and all of those things are considerations. So look for different size circles, look for different sizes, and in weird places. So maybe your kitchen is a great place to start. That's where I found all of these things. So if you don't have templates or you can't do a circle, look for something that can work for you. And it doesn't have to be like spot on 6 inches. It's just a basic guideline. So I hope that helps. What we'll be doing next then is taking our fabrics that we've decided to use for our bag and or our just scene and tracing different size circles. All right, so we are going to get started talking about turning circles into yo-yos. Yesterday we talked about picking fabrics, having them the right size, and then finding things to make the circles with. I've gone ahead and used my tracing. This was from my oatmeal canister. I made a trace mark on my fabric. I used a disappearing ink pen. This side is disappears as it dries. This side is water soluble and will stay put until you sprinkle it with water. And that's what I used here so that it would stay. So all I would need to do is spritz it with my iron and those marks disappear. But for this project, the marks don't even really make that big of a difference. So if you have a mechanical pencil, that works out really well too. And I went ahead and threaded my needle with a double strand of just thread off my spool. If you don't have thread, you have like embroidery floss or something like that, that would work as well. And to show you how I put a knot in my needle, I'm going to demonstrate using a thicker, like the plastic needle that I used to weave in my ends when I'm knitting, and a length of yarn so that it shows up a little bit better on camera. I tried to find a shirt that wasn't so busy, but all my plain shirts are in the wash. So hopefully this will provide enough of a contrast to show you how I make my knots in the end of my thread. And then that way you guys can do it as well. So here, let's just pretend this is white thread. This is a regular hand stitching needle because you'll need something obviously thinner and sharper to go through fabric. Go ahead and thread your needle first off, and then this is going to be the part that you poke through. So using the longer tail, let's set it right here. We're going to lay it on top of your needle. So to you it's behind the needle, and me it's in front. And I'm going to wrap it several times. So maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So now I have my working piece of yarn or thread down below, and I have that teeny tiny tail jutting up above, and I've got about 3 or 4 wraps here across the needle. I'm just going to pinch all of that with one finger so that nothing moves, and slide the needle all the way through and out. Oh, I might have wrapped it too tight. I did. But get it over the eye, and then just slide the whole bunch of yarn all the way down, holding on to your pinch the whole time. Give it a tug, and you have a nice little knot in your yarn. So that is how I make all the knots in all of my threads, whether I'm using it for yarn or I'm using it for a regular needle. I just thought it would show up easier rather than trying to show you on this little guy here. Here's the needle threading and the yo-yo making from an overhead shot, which will make it easier for you to visualize it for yourself when you're making your project. So here is my needle that I'm going to be using in my fabric, and I've threaded it with a length of, this is embroidery floss because my circle is a darker color. I wanted to use a darker thread so it didn't show up as much when I was making my yo-yo. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before on camera, just hold the needle in front of me, lay the tail of the thread on top, wrap it, move this out of the way. So the thread of the tail is on top, wrap it 1, 2, 3, 4 times around the needle, pinch everything together, and push the needle through while holding on to my little pinch, slide it along the length of the thread, and when I come to the end, I'll have my knot. Then when I go to start my yo-yo, I have the wrong side of the fabric facing me. I will poke the needle from the wrong side to the right side, about 1/4 of an inch down from the raw edge, pull it all the way through so that the knot is secured in the wrong side, and then start folding the edge of my yo-yo down about 1/4 of an inch and start my running stitch, which will go around the entire length of the outside of my circle. So just load up a couple of stitches, taking time to pinch down that raw edge to the wrong side. Once my needle is loaded up, slide all my stitches around And we'll continue this process all the way around the yo-yo until they've reached the end. Here I am at the end. Here's where I started and ended, and now it's just a matter of cinching up my yo-yo all the way around, pulling all my gathers into a tight little ball. Starts looking like a shower cap, and finishing off with a knot to secure everything. So just work my gathers around. I keep my thumb sort of in the middle there so that it helps until it starts forming itself, so that it helps make it go the right way. And then once you've got to a point where you've cinched it all up, flatten it out so that it looks like a flower. And then it's just a matter of securing the thread by making just a couple of knots. So I've pulled it tight, but not too tight because you don't want your thread to snap. And I'll just stick it through, catch some of these edges on my gather, pull the needle through, and secure a knot. And just do a couple of those. And then my yo-yo is complete. All I have left to do is snip my thread, and then we'll be stitching it down to my background fabric. So this was a 6-inch square and a 6-inch circle, and this was a 4-inch square and a 4-inch circle. So you can see that makes a big difference. I'll probably use this one for the top of my yo-yo flower, and this one will maybe be like a leaf or a smaller bloom. Maybe I want to do a whole bunch of these, make them all 4s all the way across and have little flowers and stems. But that's how you make a yo-yo, guys. I finished up my 4 yo-yos that I had originally planned for, 2 larger ones and then 2 smaller ones. So bear with me today, but I wanted to give you this bird's eye view because it's easier for you to see and picture for your projects. So I'm going to move the yo-yos out of the way and bring up an ironing board so we can talk about stems. Let's talk about fabric really quickly. Fabric comes off the bolt. I've gone ahead and cut this one on an angle. So fabric comes off the bolt and it has what they call a selvage edge, which is this unprinted side right here. Move that over so you can see. There it is. So this is an unprinted side. This is the selvage edge, and this is what comes off the bolt. If you're not familiar with fabric, when they roll it off the bolt, this there'll be one line like this, and the fabric will actually be folded double. So there's a selvage on the other end as well. If you cut along a lengthwise grain of fabric, that means you're cutting parallel to the selvage, and you get a piece. I've done one like that. You get a piece that has very little stretch to it. This would be the lengthwise grain. So there's very little stretch to it. So that's nice if you want it to be straight and stable and, you know, which would work perfectly for this bag. If you're just gonna do a stem going straight up and down, cutting along a lengthwise grain of the fabric would work just nicely. And this is a 2-inch wide strip. If you want a little bit of stretch to your fabric, you can cut along the crosswise grain. So going perpendicular to the selvage edge will produce a strip that gives you a little bit of stretch. So if you wanted some malleability, yeah, you wanted a piece that you can manipulate a little bit better, you could go crosswise grain and you'll get a little bit of stretch to that, like if you wanted to bend your stem or twist your stem in any way. Your third option is to cut on the bias, which is cutting your strip at a 45-degree angle, and you can see that's what I took off here. I cut at a 45-degree angle, and that gives you the most stretch in your strip. So if you really wanted to manipulate your fabric stem and you kind of wanted to make like a little wiggly stem for your flowers, then you would cut on the bias, and that would give you lots and lots of stretch. So those are 3 different options for your stem. For the sake of simplicity, I am going to use the lengthwise grain, and which is the one that doesn't stretch as much. And I'm also going to use this bias tape maker. And these are available at Joann's or other craft stores. If you don't have a bias tape maker, I'll show you how to accomplish what we're doing today with that one. But what's really cool about these is that you insert them. I just, made my corners a little bit blunted so it's easier to fit in. It'll tell you what your opening size is here and what your opening size is here. So you just cut your strip accordingly. And you feed it through with the wrong side facing up. And then pull it, and what it does is it takes the fabric ends and it turns it in on itself so that you have all the raw edges go to the middle, and then you can just iron them. And when I'm doing this not on camera, I would just pull this with one hand and continuously follow it with the iron, so it's a nice and quick process. And you would just continue all the way down your strip until you have a stem where all the raw edges are to the inside. And then you have a completed stem. You just run it off when you're done and finish it up. Then when you flip it to the right side, you have a stem that's skinnier, half the size of what you started with, and all those raw edges are tucked to the inside. So that's how I would make my stem for my bag or piece with my flowers, and it would look like that. Now, if you don't like the stems that wide, you can start with a skinnier piece of fabric that would yield a skinnier stem for your flowers. That would work just fine. So, and then if you don't have one of these handy dandy tools, you could just manually turn the ends in and achieve the same look. It just takes a little bit more work on your part. So the first step would be finding your midpoint on your strip, and I like to just finger press that so I can eyeball it, and also it doesn't make a hard crease in my stem, because where this fold is going to be what shows up as your stem. So you can kind of eyeball and see where that midpoint is, and then you would just fold one raw edge down to the midpoint and iron it, and do that along the entire length of the stem. For the other side, you would just meet where your first fold was and iron it as well. So that's how you make your stems. And I'll replace this one here. And place our new one over here. And because the second one has a little bit of stretch to it, if I wanted to, when we get to stitching, I can curve this one. Bias tape, the one that's cut on the bias will work best for this, but if I wanted to, I could manipulate this one a little bit differently if I didn't want to go straight up and down. We are up to the part where we are attaching our yo-yos and their stems to our background fabric. I apologize, the light is maybe 9 o'clock in the morning is not the best time to do it because the lighting is not great. The sun is in the wrong spot, but we'll do the best that we can. Yesterday, we talked about making the stems of our flowers, and I showed you 3 different ways that you can cut your fabric to give you 3 different amounts of stretch depending on what you wanted to do with your stems. And then last night or yesterday afternoon, after I talked to you guys, I did a basic layout of what I want my finished product to look like. And I've pinned everything in place. You can see my little pins here on my yo-yos, and I have some on my stems as well. And that would be step one for organizing your final layout. I'll hold the piece back so you can see everything on the screen. And once I've decided where everything is going to live, then I would start stitching. So everything is pinned in place. I've done some stitching already off camera so that you're not sitting here watching me do all of that. But you all can tell which parts are going to be behind and which parts are going to lay on top of your final design. And once you have those decisions made, you can pin everything in place and then peel back in layers back to your base so that you can stitch in order from closest to the background fabric out to further away from the background fabric, if that makes sense. So we are going to take off the yo-yos so that, where did I put my pin on this one? It was blending in. Take off the yo-yos so that we just have the stem. And what I did for this stem is to hand stitch up and down both sides of the stem. I created may have lost my needle. I used just the running stitch that we have been talking about all along when we created our yo-yos, and I've just gone up and down and up and down and up and down and up through my stem, and I just have a very little bit to finish off here, and then my stems are in there. And then I just wanted to show you today how to stitch on the yo-yo itself, because it's a little bit different. I don't mind these stitches showing, they're decorative. The color is very close to the color of the stem itself, as you can sort of see. Hopefully that shows up enough on camera. But I don't want those stitches to show up here in the yo-yo. So, hey Tanisha. So I will be doing a different stitch for the yo-yos themselves. And since this overhead bird's eye view will give you a better idea of what it might look like while you're working on your project, I just thought I'd insert those directions again from this perspective. So I'm starting with my thread, which has my knot in the end of it, and I will be working from the back of my background fabric, coming up and catching just the very edge of my yo-yo, pulling that thread all the way forward and through all the fabrics. And then when I go back down, I'm going to put my needle right next to where I came up in my yo-yo, but I'm just going to be poking through the background fabric. So that secures the yo-yo to the background fabric. And then I'll continue around the circle. So moving maybe 1/4 inch from where I made my last stitch, I'll come up through just the edge of the yo-yo, pull it all the way through, and then go down just in the background fabric right next to my yo-yo and pull it all the way through. Once you get comfortable with that procedure, you can kind of not eliminate a step, but make the transition a little smoother if when you pull up through your yo-yo and are ready to go back down into your background fabric, you can rock your needle a little bit and find your next spot to come up in your yo-yo and push it through. So it just sort of shortens the movement a little bit, tightens it up a bit, and you're making one poke instead of 2 pokes with your needle. You can just work that all the way around the yo-yo until you come back to the beginning where you started, and you'll just bring the thread to the back of the work and make a couple of knots to secure it in place. So that is just another angle on how to attach your yo-yo to your background fabric. I hope that helped. And even though you can choose to machine stitch your stems down, it's best to do hand stitching on the yo-yos so that your stitches don't show up and you don't mash down any of this cool three-dimensionality that you have going on your yo-yos. You want to be able to maintain all of that as you're stitching. So this is how I'm going to attach all the yo-yos to my piece, and then I will have a completed yo-yo artwork, scrappy piece, whatever you like to call it. This can be a finished project right as it is with the yo-yos and the stems stitched down, or we can take it to the next step and make it into a tote bag, which is what I'm going to show you step by step next week.